Hi, everyone. So before we get to today's episode, let me say something for myself so that you understand where we're going here. So I'm a person who has a very high tolerance for things that are not, let's say, that great. So in the university, I have the reputation of someone who is very lenient in marking. Also, I have a lot of faith to ideas that I like. For example, I liked the first Jaws film, and I managed to watch Jaws #4, The Revenge, which is considered perhaps the worst film in history, 3 or 4 times. So when in the next half an hour or so, we say some things about the Atlas Shrugged films that might not be that good, please trust us that we don't come from a point of view that we like bashing bad films or we like talking bad things about the work of other people. However, someone has to do it. And however, what we need to do today is not just say that these films are bad, but actually try to understand why it's so difficult to take a philosophical work like Atlas Shrugged and produce something good out of it, why it's very risky to do it, and also try to learn, let's say, from the mistakes of these 3 films. So we have with us today James Valliant, the author of The Passion of Ayn Rand Critics and Creating Christ. So we started a discussion last week about misrepresenters of objectivism, and we continue today with the films. But also we have with us the capitalist, the scholar, Jonathan Honig. Hi, Jonathan.
Great to be with you, Nikos. You know, as you both know, I appear in 2 of the 3 Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged films. So I'm delighted to be with James and delighted to share some of my experiences with you today.
Thank you. So, James, let's start from the beginning. So, before we get to these specific films, so what are the difficulties and what are the struggles to begin with making a film or a TV series from Atlas Shrugged? Why has it been such a difficult endeavor? So Ayn Rand has been thinking about doing it from some early stage. It was the last big project of your lives. He didn't manage to finish it. So why is it so difficult to take such an exciting story and make it an exciting book or a TV series out of it?
There are lots of good reasons for it, starting with the idea that Rand's ideas are so unprecedented and radical. And you have to appreciate that as you approach a film where the plot theme is going to be so radical. The other thing is obviously Ayn Rand, because she had the extended opportunity of a novel, she could have longer speeches, and all of those speeches could be justified by the dramatic action because it was so detailed. Therefore, the speeches, which are a hard thing to put in movies. I mean, Ayn Rand did a brilliant job herself, I think, with the Fountainhead screenplay. Not one of my favorite films, but compared to the Atlas Shrugged movies, they were, 5-star masterpiece. It was a 5-star masterpiece. But she understood she had to reduce Rourke's speech for the film. More than that, the complexity of what's going on is a combination of mental, activity on the part, philosophical thinking on the part of the reader, as well as seeing it dramatically realized. That combination is not an easy thing to pull off. There's a lot of internal novels where a lot of it's going on inside. One can think of, I don't know if you're familiar with William Faulkner's Sound and the Fury. Very difficult to realize because it's internal from 4 different characters. Or say, the Dune movies that they're doing a 3rd one of. That's so internal and psychological, it's almost impossible to bring off. Or Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. It's got so many fantastic elements that it's hard to pull off. Atlas Shrugged is hard to pull off because it has a radical set of ideas that have to be understood in a dramatic way. And I think my first objection and this is, I think, where we really have to start, to the Atlas Shrugged films, is not even with the specific ideas that they're trying to put in, but with the aesthetics. Ayn Rand was an artist, a novelist, and an aesthetician. And Atlas Shrugged was a poorly made film, bad from her perspective in terms of dramatization. The narration. I mean, if you can do without that, please do without that. Ayn Rand was a shower, not a teller. And when she did tell in her extended speeches, she had dramatically justified that. In that sense, Atlas Shrugged was not aesthetically romantic realism, not aesthetically up to Ayn Rand's own standards of how to make a film. So just on one level, there's also production issues. When you put an epic like that, and it's an epic, I mean, it's showing the end of the world in multiple ways. The production qualities have to match that kind of epic structure. You can't you can't talk and then show stuff off screen. You can't have low production values and bad editing, bad cinematography, low grade music. The production qualities of an epic have to be in the tradition of Hollywood epics, and this fell far short of that. And so, in the first instance, it's a misrepresentation of Ayn Rand's aesthetics. It was a poorly made film, violative of Ayn Rand's own dramatic standards.
So just to give an idea to our viewers, so there are 3 films, and one could say the first is worse than every film is worse than the previous one. So I rewatched all 3 of them because specifically when I discovered Objectivism, I was so crazy about the ideas that I think I watched the first film 3 or 4 times altogether in my life, although every time I knew it was a very, very bad film. Same with the second film. The third film I only managed to watch, I think, 2 times. And there's this guy.
Did you read the book before you saw the film, or did
yes,
you...
thank God. Yes, thank God I read the book before I watched the film. So there's this guy who has this channel in YouTube called Cinema Sins, where he counts mistakes in films. I made a sins count of the 3 films. I found 41 mistakes in the first one, 48 in the second one, 60 in the third one. When I say mistakes, I mean things that I didn't like from an objectivist point of view. Now, the good news for Jonathan's worry that he was part of it is that in the way I watched them in Amazon Prime, I'm telling you the truth, Jonathan, I didn't see you there. So there was, and I've seen some scenes that I hadn't seen before. So there's a good chance that there are different. It's like the
maybe that's a comment on my performances, Nikos. Maybe
Believe me, your performance would definitely be better than many of the performances. But as an insider, what do you think was the main issue that these films didn't manage to make it to be good films? The one thing, as James said, is it's difficult with a low budget to create this epic universe where Atlas Shrugged is taking place. But what are some other problems that you noticed?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I mean, if you're interested in watching Ayn Rand on film, and James, confirm me, I believe I remember reading that Ayn Rand herself really liked the Italian adaptation of We the Living. That was an unauthorized adaptation, but I think she admired as I understand it, the kind of the visual of it, the meaning of it, and the means under which it was produced. So, you know, for our listeners and our viewers who are interested in watching something by Ayn Rand, as I recall, she actually liked that. You know, books have been written on the history of Nikos and James, how the Atlas Shrugged movies were made, came to be made. I mean, it's an interesting history in terms of the history of the objectivist movement. And at the end of the day, I mean, Dr. Peikoff, as I understand it, sold the rights, and these were the films that were made. There's a lot of criticism of them, but I'm going to kind of posit an opposing view, at least for the moment, in that I think that there was some success there. And I'm going to share a screen and point to why I think that is that, you know, back in 2011, I mean, Atlas Shrugged was on the Amazon bestseller list. I mean, these movies, as difficult as they were to watch as movies, they sold a lot of copies of Atlas Shrugged. And, you know, for me, as someone who's been moved by it, you know, the old cliches, I read Ayn Rand and it changed my life. Donahue, I think, even kind of makes fun of it in the interview. He says, "Oh, I read Atlas Shrugged," but for me, it was true. And you know, these movies, for whatever reason, you know, for better, I won't say for worse, for better, really spiked interest in reading Atlas Shrugged. And not you, Nikos. I mean, you kind of were introduced to the ideas, but I kind of think net, this was probably not a terrible thing for spreading objectivism in the history of the movement, because new movies will get made. These movies were not widely watched, but they came at, ironically, kind of a good time. And I'll share a few stills. You know, basically, I got a call from Scott DeSapio, people who were involved with it. "We know you're objectivist. Do you want to be in it?" I wrestled with a little bit, knowing, but I I said, F it. One day I'm going to be old and I'm going to say, oh, you had a chance. So here's a few shots. Nikos, as you said, I gave an interview after being up and taking the red eye to get to LA and being up the whole day. I did a lot of partying during this era in my life as well. I have to put that out there right now. But I gave an interview on the impact that Atlas has had on my life. I think that's the real benefit that these movies could have. And even in my very small promotion for the film, it's always like, hey, have you read Atlas Shrugged? I mean, reading the book is what's going to make the difference. I mean, and that's what changed it for me. So always encouraging people to pick up a copy of the book. But yes, Nikos, you didn't see my performance as wedding photographer and attendee in Atlas Shrugged.
Oh, okay. I take it back. I thought you appeared in the movie as yourself, the way Hannity appears. Okay.
No.
Okay. No, I take it back. Yes, Jonathan is in the film. Okay, sorry.
Yes. Now, obviously, I look a little blurry-eyed in that shot, and most of my memory of being on this set was people were very nice. I met Michael Shermer. I'm sure you guys know James. You probably know who that is. He was there. It was kind of a interesting smorgasbord of randoms in that green room. Amazing craft services. I've never seen craft services like this as well. So I certainly ate well. This is backstage at the wedding party where the wedding party in that Shrugged Part 2 was. So I won't spend too much time on this. John Fund was there. And again, I credit these guys for getting this thing made under difficult circumstances. They threw a party. They got Ayn Rand's name out there. They sold a hell of a lot of books. Which I think
you make a point, Jonathan, because Ayn Rand was not completely satisfied with the Fountainhead film. That was, she wrote the screenplay. She was involved in the making of that, back in 1949, and she was displeased with some of the aspects of the film, The Fountainhead. I think she had to work really hard with Gary Cooper, and it wasn't always successful in getting him to do it right. But also, she didn't like certain of the aesthetics of the way it was done. Compared to the Atlas Shrugged films, it was a masterpiece, but she wasn't satisfied with that film. She defended it from its vicious critics at the time, but the best thing in her mind was that it was a billboard for the novel. It helped sell the novel. And although her novel was selling quite well even before, 5 years after it appeared on the bestseller list in the 40s, still the Fountainhead film, a big Warner Brothers film with Gary Cooper, was a great sales thing for the Fountainhead, and really generated a lot of interest in the Fountainhead and Ayn Rand in particular, to have a big Warner Brothers film made. But she was, as you pointed out earlier, much more aesthetically satisfied with a film she had no input on. The Italians during World War II, in effect, hijacked the film, stole it without any asking for any copyrights from the author or the publisher. So they were on the hook afterwards. Ayn Rand, in effect, was in control, she compensated, and really the owner now of the film. She supervised the re-editing of it because she really liked the way it was originally 2 films done in Italy and Italian. She liked the aesthetics of it.
By the way, people, so that you don't worry, we definitely are having a whole episode on The Fountainhead, the film, and on With the Living with James. So this is coming as well. By the way, can I use this as a pitch also to say, if you appreciate the work we're doing, please make sure you become members of ARC UK, or if you have a burning question about how it felt for Jonathan to meet Francisco, because the guy who plays Francisco in movie number 2, I think he's the best thing that from all the 3 films, together with Dagny in film number 1. Dagny in film number 1 is quite good. It's in a way as I have Dagny in my mind. So feel free to ask him a super chat question about his experience.
I agree with that. I think the Dagny, one of the terrible things is they had to change actors. You have different directors, different editors, and different actors, and I think that hurt the coherence of all this. But I agree with you. I think that the first Dagny was the best.
Would you say the same thing about Different Strokes? I mean, you had 3 different housekeepers on Different Strokes over the course of that show, and you're both discounting Jonathan Honig's performance as unhappy 20th century motor car worker. This is from the 3rd film. I have to say, I made it about 20 minutes through the 3rd film. And I just, what's so frustrating, I think we both, is that these are such exciting stories. They're moving, passionate stories, and the films weren't. But There's the call sheet, and to their credit, I mean, they actually talk about detail. They actually gave us uniforms that had the name of the 20th Century Motor Company on it. This is behind the scenes. That's the director, whose name escapes me right now. But you can understand, like, I'm a fan of Ayn Rand. So to see, I don't know if you guys can see, this is like the trailer. You know, they have like the characters' names on the trailer. I mean, it was exciting. It was exciting to be part of it. I don't regret being part of it. I'm delighted that it sold books, and I think and expect that new versions of Ayn Rand's work will be made in really mass market popular ways in the future, and that's a positive all around.
So here's a question to both of you. So what seems to be the case is, by the way, I totally understand Jonathan. And again, I didn't like the film, but I was so addicted to the ideas that I want to see these ideas on screen. Even if it's played by cats, I would still watch it. The question is this, though. If someone hasn't read the book, do you think that there's a chance that one can see either these films or other films and actually get what it is about? So whenever what we all dream, a big, let's say, HBO production with people playing. So in the past, for example, Clint Eastwood, I think, has been mentioned as a Reardon, which would be great. Charlize Theron as a Dagny would be brilliant. Brad Pitt maybe as a Galt. I don't know who else could play him. But anyway, so if we have this huge production, do you think that it will still be more appealing to the ones who already read the book? Or do you think that someone who has not read the book can actually grasp it? So is ever HBO or someone like that say, you know what, this can, although this, I'm not going to touch the ideas. So the rational selfishness is going to be there. The celebration of capitalism is going to be there. The first hand is going to be there. I'm not going to touch the ideas, but at the same time, I'm going to try to target a market of millions of viewers. Do you think this is possible?
Yes, I do. I think Ayn Rand thought it was possible. Ayn Rand herself in the 1970s, was working on a project, a television miniseries with Albert Ruddy, a big Hollywood producer, to realize it in the 1970s as a television miniseries, which would have given them, I think, a lot more time to do it properly. But Ayn Rand herself believed it could be dramatically realized. Ayn Rand herself thought that it could be done faithfully. She actually engaged in doing it. When that deal fell through, right before her death, she actually undertook to write it herself and produce it herself. Unfortunately, she died before she could realize much of that. But Rand herself believed Atlas Shrugged could be dramatically realized. Now, when you look at the actual films here, one of the problems is that at the end of the day, it feels like a political screed. Ayn Rand is much more philosophical. Ayn Rand saw it as a metaphysical theme, the role of the mind in human existence. And every time they back into attempting to address a deeper metaphysical or ethical theme of Ayn Rand's, it just feels so ham-handed and artificial.
And James, on our chat, Ian mentions that the inclusion of real world people, I think he's talking about people like Hannity, kind of political folks, he says was one of the worst things about the films.
Yeah.
And let me give one example on that.
The stock footage, those cameos. You were delightful, Jonathan.
So here's an example of what our friend says on the chat. So for example, Ron, first of all, let's give some context. These films are shot during the Obama years. So this is the time of the Tea Party. This is the time that the conservative movement goes out with placards, who is John Galt? Of course, they wouldn't understand who is John Galt, even if it hit them on the head with a baseball bat, but that's another discussion. So for example, because it has this political rather than philosophical element that you mentioned, we see, for example, Ron Paul showing up in the film and saying that the problem is endless wars. Now, this makes sense within the Tea Party of 2012. It makes zero sense within the universe of Atlas Shrugged. So,
exactly. Now, Ayn Rand did not believe we should engage in altruistic foreign wars like Vietnam or something. She didn't think we should be allied with Russia during World War II. So, yeah, she was an advocate of peace. But my God, to turn it into a libertarian peace screed is out of place in Atlas Shrugged, did not belong there. Ron Paul. I've met Ron Paul. Swell guy. disagree with him about certain things, but he doesn't belong there, frankly.
Right.
But, I mean, how much of that has to do, or the title of our show today is about the misrepresenters of objectivism.
Yeah.
I mean, it's no secret that this is a fact of reality. The Atlas Society were, I believe, consultants on the film. Jim, to your knowledge, is that kind of, I don't know, do you think that's why a lot of this ultimately got by?
Yeah. I don't think they were demanding. By that point, Leonard Peikoff himself had given up control over it, had sold the rights.
Tell the story. You were with Dr. Peikoff at that period. Would you share that story?
Yeah, I remember his living room that night saying, look, I either have control over it and they do it right, or I'm just going to cut loose, hope for the best, and let someone else have it. And by that point, he'd reached the point where he was cutting loose and just letting someone else have the rights. Now, these producers, as I understand it, had a very limited time frame to exercise those rights, which he'd previously sold and had bought. And that's why these movies got made in such a hurry. Another reason, I think, that may have hurt the quality of the films, they had to make them in a hurry to get within that window where they still had the rights to make the film, because it was a limited time frame. They had the legal rights to do so.
So let me say three last things. So I want to ask a question first. I said I'm not going to be the bad person here, but I have to be. How is it possible that you can be a philosopher who has been part of the objectivist movement? I'm talking about Kelly, who was part of the production. Again, I understand how difficult the project is. I understand all that. But having seen the first movie and then having seen the second movie, there should be a point where you say, you know what? I don't want anything to do with this, and I'm gonna sell my house and buy all the copies of the film and burn them rather than having to be associated with this. So what do you think? Okay, I can't ask you what do you think that Kelly was thinking, but anyway, I don't know.
Can I just say, Nikos, do you honestly think it does that much damage? I remember reading about, and James, remind me if I'm wrong, but basically people at certain points wanting to put priests into the scripts, and people would come along and say, oh, so I mean, at the end of the day, Nikos, is it, I almost feel like how much harm long term, I mean, did this do really any long lasting damage to the objectivist movement, to Ayn Rand's legacy? These films are probably going to be forgotten pretty quickly. The rights have reverted to Dr. Peikoff. They'll be re-exploited. So, I mean, they're not great films.
Let me give you
and I have
example.
other introductions. If people want to learn Ayn Rand, I mean, there's shorter texts. Textbook of Americanism is a short text. There's other ways to get into Ayn Rand, but I don't see this as being a real long-term damage. I wouldn't recommend the films. I would just ignore them.
Okay, I get that, but so for example, I was with a girl back in the day, and God knows why we watched the films. I had read the book. She hadn't read the book. It was I was trying to persuade her to read Atlas Shrugged. She watched the films. And this was okay. Well, I don't know what the hype is about. You're a weirdo. I'm not reading the book. But let me tell you the top 3 reasons why I think these films are really not only bad, really bad. The one is how they completely miss the point. The one is the sex scenes, the romantic scenes.
Oh my God.
So
talk about hard to watch. God.
So again, you might not like objectivism, you might not like the ideas, but you cannot read the romantic scenes in Atlas Shrugged and not be moved. How are these scenes transferred on TV? Let me tell you 2 examples. Hope it's not too much information. So in the first film, the first sex scene between, mild spoiler alert, Dagny and Hank, it's this thing where they sit. So first of all, Hank gives her a 2 minutes warning, I'm gonna kiss you.
You know how romantic that is.
And then
Sorry.
it's this slow kind of touching. And anyway, I don't want to enter. So this is one big thing that is missing. A second thing is, you mentioned it, James, in a good film has to show, not tell. Example from the episode 2 days ago, I talk about La La Land. The most powerful part is the last scene where they stare at each other and they say everything without a single word. Now, in Atlas Shrugged, people have to talk all the time and conceive and put forward the messages, because the qua films are so bad that if you don't hear the things, you don't get the ideas. And the third thing is the choice of the actors. Okay, I get it that they had to change from film to film, but go in an acting school and find a kid who's like 30 years old. So in the third film, Francisco is, I don't know, in his late 50s, and Dagny is early 30s, maybe late 20s. And the worst thing, Ragnar. Ayn Rand describes Ragnar as someone who his face was so beautiful that Dagny couldn't imagine him of doing any job. And the guy who plays Ragnar is something between an early 90s wrestler and a truck driver. I mean, great guy, but completely out. That's and
Right.
that is my.
He has to look like a pristine saint, right?
Like a pristine saint. Yes.
Right.
So that's my biggest complaint for the people who know objectivism and were related. Look, I can understand everything else, but someone should say, people, veto. I need to veto that. This is very important. Dagny was the childhood friend with Francisco. They can have 5 years difference. They cannot have 25 years difference. So anyway, I know people who go full into conspiracy theory mode and say, well, this is like an intentional misrepresentation. I don't want to say that. I'm not saying that. What I cannot understand is how can you be so passionate about what these fields represent and let this slide. But anyway, again, we said we wouldn't be bad, but again, some things have to be addressed. Gentlemen, parting words. What's your takeaway from this?
I'll just say, I mean, I think this is really the beginning of seeing great content based on Ayn Rand's works. I don't know Zack Snyder, but I know a couple of objectivists who are really into him. And as I understand it, he's kind of cooking up something with the Fountainhead. So, to me, Ayn Rand is mass market. It is as, it should be a huge popular miniseries movie, Netflix. And I think there's going to be a lot of that coming down the pipeline. And what will make it happen is support of institutions like the Ayn Rand Center UK, because the only way a producer is going to greenlight Atlas Shrugged is when they see that, oh yeah, Ayn Rand has a lot of interest. So thank you for your support of us and of others' ideas. And thank you, Jim, for being with us once again.
Oh, it's always a pleasure.
And one thing, so that we don't want people to have their Friday night with this bitter taste in their mouth. So what is the Ayn Rand Center is offering as an alternative to a bad film is the very good series, The Psychology of the Fountainhead. Today, new episode premiering, I think, 9 o'clock UK time. The Psychology of Kate. Kate is the girlfriend for some time of Peter Keating, one of the most tragic characters in the Randian universe, and some of the best people who understand psychology within the universe, let's say, of objectivism appear in this episode and give their take. Gentlemen, thank you very, very much. Have a great weekend. Just to remind Jonathan, the Lord Emperor behind the scenes tonight is not behind the scenes, so it's you who have to put an end to today's show.
I'll be happy to thank you all for being with us. Thank you for supporting us. And please subscribe and stay tuned right here to the Ayn Rand Center UK. We'll see you next